It's live. This is a live audience. Wasn't fun on that. We don't have any canned laughter, canned applause, so this is all truly lights.
Live studio audience.
Yes. So happy to have you all here. Thank you for making the time. It's a busy time. A number of people let me know that they couldn't make it because of conflicts or out of town, things like that. So summer comes, especially the front end of summer, it gets busy for people. So I'm grateful that you were willing to take the time and be in this space together and explore interesting things and explore your hearts with each other. And appreciate Jana Spangler and Rob for opening their home again. Yay. Yeah, we're very grateful for that. Thankful for Barbara Jones Brown from Signature Books, the editor and publisher of that book right there. Showing backwards, but Dictates of Conscience. This is Laurie Lee's book, nice hardcover book. I just finished listening to it today. You can also do it on Audible. Really,
Kindle.
That's true. Yeah, Kindle. Very worth your time. I didn't have really any expectations, didn't know what to think, and I was super impressed and moved by it. So well done, you guys.
Thank you.
You gals.
And you knew me before, so
I did.
You knew some of the stories, so that
Yeah,
it still was useful to you.
oh
Yeah.
Yeah. I hadn't thought about that, but yeah. This group actually is mentioned towards the end of the book because that was an important moment in your life back then, when you were and on the early stages of transitioning. Thank you, Laurie Lee, for being here.
My pleasure.
Partner Nancy's right back here. Here, I'll just feel real quick.
There
she
There's
is.
Nancy. You'll recognize her from the book.
Yeah, there you go. And you guys drove all the way from Kentucky.
Yep.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, brought our own car because we're going to be here a while.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It wasn't just for this.
Well, no. Actually, we've had a few things already, and we've got several others that are scheduled, and I've posted those upcoming events.
On your Instagram and
on my
Facebook?
Facebook and Instagram. Yes.
Good. So anyway, I was really excited when I thought I should have Laurie Lee come, and I reached out and found out when she was coming. I said, could you do another thing? And she said yes.
Yeah.
I would like to begin with an opening prayer. I have not thought about who might want to do that. Does anybody want to volunteer? And again, you can pray any which way you feel like. We have people from different faiths and no faith come here, so I'm kind of a big fan of adding Mother in Heaven in there, but you can do what you want. Sure, that would be great for you.
Our dear God, we gather together tonight in gratitude that your creation includes so much variety and goodness in it. We're grateful for the love that we can share here, and grateful for our hosts and our guests, that we may be free as to be honest with each other and continue to grow in love and appreciation for thy creation. Please watch over all those who are traveling wherever they are today, and watch over those who have big challenges in their lives. May we make the path a little easier for everyone. We pray this in the name of our Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Shalene. I also want to thank Jana for womaning. I tell you, you know why, guy? There's so many great other words. Come out of my mouth.
Womaning is a
Anyway, Zoom. Thank you for doing Zoom for us. Normally, my wife Jane would do that, but her book group is tonight at our house, so tonight was the night worked best for Laurie Lee, so I'll make that happen. What else? Oh, and thanks to Faith Matters for providing the Zoom connection. I think we've got everything covered there. Anything I'm forgetting, anybody?
Oh, we have one of my fans from Calgary, Canada.
Oh, cool.
We're international.
Yeah,
Yes.
we're in Andrea's with us tonight.
Hey. So Laurie, right, also? Now, you been to one of these groups before?
I have not,
Okay.
no.
So just a quick spiel. This is a safe place for you to say whatever's on your heart and mind.
Yeah.
So just want you to understand and know that. So the title of this is Questions and Answers for this fine young woman. Well, you're not young because you graduated the same year I did, 79.
Yeah.
That makes
This
me.
fine woman.
So we can define ourselves anyway it is.
Anyway, she's, I put out podcasts on the website that you can listen to, a link to the book, which again, I recommend. But I thought it would be more interesting if we just kind of query her. She's good on her feet. She's had, decades of experience having to be on her feet for all kinds of situations, in her profession and otherwise. So I did want to start with a few questions. And it'd probably be better if a woman asked these, but I'm going to ask them anyway. What's your favorite chick flick?
Chick flick. Thought you were gonna ask Chick-fil-A. I'll take the 4-piece stretch. Wow, things like Sleepless in Seattle don't mind,
Classic.
Yeah, Rob Reiner played an architect in that one as well as
Haven't seen
Tom
it.
Hanks' position. Yeah,
Hmm.
no, that was a good one.
Yeah, I
So
like that.
yeah,
Good
sorry,
one.
it's not like I have lots of recent movie.
Sure, I mean,
experiences.
that's okay. So what is a favorite girls' night out activity? I mean, you don't have a whole lifetime to pull from on that one. But hopefully you've had some fun girls.
Well,
night out.
back in the Faith Matters
Earlier days. when we were
earlier
doing
days
this,
when we were doing this, we do a lot of Mexican trained dominoes at Mark and Don's house.
Ah,
Yeah, on odd nights that we weren't meeting, we're playing
That's great.
Mexican
Don's
train.
on there right now.
Yeah, I know. But more recently, we might go out for Indian food.
That's good.
Yeah.
What would you say is one of the best things about being a girly woman?
That's who I am. It's like,
So to finally actually be one.
yeah,
Period.
yeah, just period. I mentioned or kind of allude to in the book, and I think I probably do more than allude to it, that as a child, I wanted nothing more than to be seen for who I knew myself to be. Until I discovered as a young person, preteen and teen, that was dangerous. And then I didn't want anybody to see who I was. And I managed to hide that for decades. But certainly the peace of mind of being able to become authentically me, live as I've always felt that I was, and to stop the pretense of trying to be something else. That was exhausting.
Well, you describe it as like a jet engine.
Yeah,
Sound. It's
yeah,
just always roaring
that
behind you.
roaring dysphoria.
Yeah.
And occasionally it might throttle down a little bit, but when it finally shut off and went away, as well as the pretense of just trying to present as male, to simply,
When you didn't feel that way inside.
when I didn't feel that way inside, to the point where I think I mentioned I got to the point trying to get ready for church one day that putting the tie on with the white shirt was just.
You didn't go that day.
I didn't get it that day. I didn't teach my gospel doctrine lesson, but it was crushing my spirit to have to keep presenting that way. And so what's great about being a woman? Like, being a woman is great about being a woman. I don't worry much about my presentation. We're kind of homebodies, and if I feel like just t-shirt and jeans, that's great.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I need Nancy's help to kind of spiff me up a little bit, but.
Are you a good stiffer upper? Oh,
Yeah.
that's good, yeah.
You know, I guess I don't know how to define that question anymore without, you know,
Well, for you, it would be, yeah.
it's
um,
just
Profound.
profound reality,
Yeah.
you know, authenticity.
Thank you. That's,
Mhm.
so a little bit about your childhood, because I found that interesting. I mean, this gender dysphoria is one, difficult element, but that wasn't the only difficult element in your childhood. And that's one thing that really struck me. Your family life was challenging. You want to
Yeah.
describe that a little bit?
Yeah, it was, I mean, I suspect that a lot of people have some experience with dysfunctional family, but I did, and I thought long and hard about including that or not including that. But it was kind of like integral to the whole experience. It was just, again, like the dysphoria, it was always there, that there was a lot of tension in the home that, in hindsight, I think totally could have been avoided with proper mental health, in the case of my dad. And things could have been a lot better. But I think in the back of my mind, going through that kind of upbringing gave me uh, two characteristics that I then put to good use going forward in my adult life, and that was I learned to be strictly obedient in that home because I was the peacemaker and I didn't want to rattle anything, and that actually fit pretty well in my first 20 years or so as a Latter-day Saint.
I was going to say
That
good segue.
yeah, I learned a lot about, staying on the straight and narrow.
Mm.
And then the other thing was just being resilient and having the courage to get up and survive every day. And when necessary, to take that step into the dark. And whether it was when I left home to go to architecture school or
Yeah.
any number of other things, leave architecture school so I could go serve a mission in the dark, just things that I didn't know other people doing, and I was doing them.
Yeah.
And I think that all served me well, but that resilience became especially critical when I started facing down, one general authority interview after another and letting them know who I really was and what I really needed as a church member and an employee and so forth, that and we ultimately had to agree to disagree. They testify on one topic to me and I testify back what I knew about myself, and eventually had to make a break and progress towards authenticity kind of on my own. So that, I think there are elements of my childhood that helped me to hone
The
those
challenges of your childhood.
characteristics that I needed
Yeah.
later on.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
One of the things that impressed me from your childhood is your resilience in the face of quite a difficult father
Mhm.
that did not seem to give you much positive feedback for anything.
Mhm.
And the fact that you were able to and then you got the gender dysphoria underlaying all that, which would not help your self-esteem. But somehow you would find a way to, I mean, probably you were very smart. That helped you. Very brilliant, and you were very artistic.
Mhm.
So those two elements gave you something. Then you had, I love that you call out some mentors and people in your life that along the way that helped you through grade school, before you ever a member of the church, people that, teachers and such that saw your potential and your talent and that must have been very meaningful.
It was because I wasn't mainstream, and I think I pointed that out. And my my high school experience was not not in the mainstream, and in the end, I did the things again. I did the things I needed to do to get to where I wanted to, which was Rensselaer and studying architecture.
Yeah, which was a prestigious college.
Yeah,
Yeah, and especially for you being the first to ever go to college in your family.
Yeah,
that was a big deal, and your dad was not happy about that.
Yeah.
Because he wanted you to take over the business.
Yeah.
Mechanic business.
Yeah. Yeah.
That would be.
Maybe if I had been a son, that would have worked. I don't know.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think about these things.
So well, yeah, and so I thought about the fact that you were a female in a male body. Are you looking back now this far down the road? Is there some? I mean, are you kind of at peace with that and going, this is a valuable journey, and I'm in a space where I can help and do things that I would never have been able to do if I had been a female in a female body instead.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of pain and difficulty along the way. You do comment a little bit on that in the book.
Yeah, no, I think all of us could look at our lives and say, gee, if I'd have done that differently, or if that had been a different situation. But I don't live with regret for where
you ended up in the university.
Yeah, where I've ended up in the universe. And I even think about the fact I've thought a lot about the fact that if the information and support were available, I could have transitioned at this point in time or at this point in time. But if I had, I wouldn't be sitting here tonight.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have had
a different story.
I wouldn't have much of a story to tell, because it's a lot better the way it worked out, I guess. But I'm deeply grateful that I got to the point where I could make that transition, where I could have this whole story to tell. It's a great privilege, and opportunity, one that I respect, to be able to share all the elements of this journey. Hopefully, so others that are coming on behind me will benefit from it and maybe see a hopefulness, because I think at the end of the day, Dictates of Conscience is a hopeful and happy ending story. I often say it has a happy ending because I'm still here talking about it.
Because there were times you did not want to be here.
Yeah, or could have never really imagined that it could come to be as good as it is. And my most common readers are moms with trans kids, or sometimes grandmas with trans kids. They read the book and they reach out to me and provide feedback and gratitude that there's someone, and there are many others, I'm not the only one, but there is someone that they can hold up to their kid and say, look, you can do this and you can be successful and you'll be accepted. Look at someone who did this before you. And on the other hand, I went through decades of not having things available to me that governments right now are trying to take away from kids. And I know how hard that can be to not have that. So I can really speak to the fact that, if the science exists, if the help exists, the support exists, why wouldn't you want kids to have that? Yeah. So there's just, yes, I'm grateful for where the story has taken me. Would I have transitioned at 18 when I left my parents' home if it had been available? I'm convinced my head and heart were there.
Well, yeah, you were sneaking out.
I was ready.
The house.
That's that night I went out the window of the pantry.
I'll tell you, my heart was beating when I was reading that.
But
This is going to screw up his
his
college now, his scholarship.
I was going
somewhere.
somewhere that night until I realized I didn't know where I was going.
Yeah.
But that's a metaphor for the fact that there wasn't any place for a trans person to go. generally at that point in time, coming and living in a rural place and not having access to information and support. And I turned around and buried it. But I was going someplace that night in 1979.
Yeah. It's interesting, this burying, you did that a number of times
Yeah.
through your life before you were able to reach a time and place where you were going to turn that spade again.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And there were other points in time where I, bumped up against it. And this is very common for transgender folk my age that went through, decades of waiting for that day to come, where, you'd get into it and then say, no, this doesn't work, and purge and, make it all go away and then start all over again. And, that's a fairly common story for folks that have been around a while.
Yeah. Well, even gay and lesbian, that's
Sure.
very similar too.
Sure.
Challenging. Let's see. So, yeah, and you talk about PE rooms and locker rooms in high school. That would have been, they seem to do things a little different than when I grew up, but I mean, I don't know if they do showers like when you and I grew up. That you
Yeah.
would have to, but there's just so many little things that
It's as though
the cis male would not think about.
Yeah, those were holdovers from the military service, I think. Maybe, but
Yeah.
you know what I'm talking
Oh, I
about.
do, yeah, and I can see, yeah,
No, so just
That-
imagine your sister in that circumstance.
yeah. It would be really awkward and uncomfortable and, well, even frightening, right?
Yeah.
To feel like,
Yeah.
yeah. And then even in the MTC.
MTC was a nightmare because there was nowhere to hide.
Yeah, because you had a schedule. You
Yeah.
couldn't shower at night. You had to shower when everybody else showered.
Mhm. Yeah, I faked it at Rensselaer, but missionary training center was 10 weeks of
Yeah.
public nudity.
On display. And you did not want to be. I loved hearing about that night, I think it was graduation night, high school, where you did not anticipate any recognition.
Because none was ever forthcoming.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Tell a little bit about that, because that was kind of a beautiful moment, I think, for you.
Yeah, we had a successful high school for being a little, level 3 high school. Did really well in a lot of things, but the little niche that I had was, and a few others that were part of the art department, was we were really picking up some gold, in the art shows, and I had led that all that year. And after all the other recognition had gone, for all the musicals and high school football and basketball awards and so forth, all of those things, and it was about to close. And the art department director jumped up and stole the microphone in a very bold way. And she's just a little bit of a lady. And she had me stand up and introduce the fact that after everyone else's scholarships had been described, was that I had actually gotten one as well to Rensselaer, and it was the largest scholarship that anyone in the graduating class had received, and it had been overlooked. There was a prejudice there that because I wasn't on the main matriculated path, I was doing it my way, and they didn't like that. And but she got me the recognition that she wanted me to have, which I wasn't expecting, but kind of appreciated. It was a
big deal.
It was a nice punctuation to
Mhm.
that part of my life, and I couldn't wait to get out of there and to get out of my parents' house and get on with my life.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's not uncommon.
Yeah, that's true. But you had some more difficult circumstances than many. One of the things that impressed me, and I don't know if you look back and feel like it was also God kind of moving through various people, like this person that you just mentioned. But you talk a lot about God moving through you and inspiring you still, well, to this day. But I appreciate that is the case. And so there's two things here. I guess one thing is I just want us to you know, as we leave tonight, keep in mind that we could be one of those people
Absolutely.
that
Yeah.
have been in your life
Mhm.
that, you know, really made a difference. Um, and it doesn't take a bunch of them, but it, you know, sometimes there just needs to be somebody there that steps up and supports someone who needs to be supported. And then the other thing is your confidence in what you call in the book, you know, listening to the spirit, feeling guided by your impressions. And you recount a number of times where those really kind of powerfully play out
Mhm.
in a really dramatic way. What's one of those that you maybe would like to share? One or two of those
Sure.
experiences?
Um, and
Like maybe you should, sorry, maybe you should say quickly about your conversion to church when you were in college.
yeah,
Because
yeah,
that's, but you, I sense you were spiritual before then even.
yeah,
In
yeah.
your own way, you didn't know how to, didn't have words.
Yeah, without the words necessarily to explain it then. And you know, and then I adopted the words from Mormonism
Yeah,
that I still pretty much use,
Yeah.
even though I may see things a little bit differently. But one of the underlying themes of Dictates of Conscience is that very fact that supports the title, you know, that there is a spiritual element, at least there was in my life, you know, from a young age on through. I don't know how on earth I knew that I wanted to be an architect. I'd never met one. And
I mean, you
I
had the
no
artistic
clue.
talent, your mentor wanted you to go into fine
Yeah,
arts.
fine arts and so forth, but no, I was determined that I was going to be an architect. I can't attribute that to anything else besides um, the hand of the Lord, using terms from Mormonism. You know that,
Yeah,
you know that I was as it was as if I was called at age 14 to do that, to prepare to do that.
to prepare to become what you became.
Yeah.
A temple architect and
Yeah,
profoundly.
which I never imagined could happen.
Well, yeah.
But
Fascinating.
so you know that occurred. I went off to Rensselaer, and in my first semester met a classmate who I described in the book, who introduced me to the church. And you know, I had spiritual experiences with the Book of Mormon. I had spiritual experiences at the church history sites that I described. Um, I was attracted to the gospel life, the family life that I saw portrayed that I might someday enjoy, as opposed to what I experienced growing up.
Yeah.
You know, church had that swinging in the early 80s. You know, that was working. And I talk as well about the identification of this priesthood path. My young son, who has since left the church, once said to me not long ago, said, "You know what? That Mormon church works really well for straight white guys." And
It's true.
and since
It's very true.
and since I had made the decision to be
be a
one of those
straight white
straight
guy.
white guys, I just dove into it, and you know, I was determined that I was going to put everything into this priesthood path, and lo and behold, within a little bit of time, I had gained all of the accolades and rewards associated
Yeah.
with that priesthood life.
Yeah, actually in a short amount of time. I mean, how long was it until you became a bishop from the time you joined the church?
Um,
I didn't get a good sense of the chronology.
I joined
but
in 80 and was a bishop in 98, so 18 years.
And in the meantime, you served a mission.
Yeah.
I mean, you were. It was so remarkable and challenging to get into that prestigious college, but you felt felt that God wanted you to go on a mission.
The call to go on a mission.
You were able to convince them. They'd never done that before.
Not in recent memory, anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, they had no idea what Mormon missions were about, and I convinced them that it would be okay to let me go, and that they would welcome me back, you know, 4 semesters later. And
you survived the mission.
I did survive the mission. I loved my mission.
Yeah.
You know, it was a
Like the puma.
yeah. I do have a picture. It didn't make it into the book, but I do have a picture of the puma going home with with my companion. But
You told me you had that, I would have put it in. And just find out later.
no, I had it. I just didn't put it in the book. I didn't exactly
Second edition.
have a.
I don't want the Puma in the second edition.
I'd have to reach out to my
Permission
former.
from the dead puma.
From the dead, and Parley would have been okay, but I'm not sure about it.
So probably people.
But that whole experience of producing the big exposition that we ran in the park,
Yeah.
that was a precursor for me to, throwing my talents at something to build up the church.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I didn't forget that. So
Well, yeah, and I think it probably, it continued to affect that mission positively because it was going nowhere basically before, at least in the cities.
yeah,
In
Right.
terms of proselyting, there was no success.
right after that war, United Kingdom as well.
Oh, yeah,
Where did you serve? I missed that.
Buenos Aires.
Buenos Aires.
yeah, yeah. And then they had a war with the United Kingdom right
Yeah.
after.
And we were the first missionaries let back into the country
Right
at that
before,
point in time.
yes, yeah. I can't remember where the thread was.
Well, we were heading
So many
down
fun things. in
This
the book.
this world, but I do want to point out that it was very deliberate, knowing the story I was going to be telling, and the decisions that I followed and that I needed to make with my life to help folks realize that I'm not naturally a troublemaker. I'm not someone who naturally
Right.
or easily goes off script.
Yeah.
I was deep into it and I was a straight shooter and
Yeah.
I was having these spiritual experiences all the time and I kept having them.
Yeah.
And it led me to where I am now. And I don't know if that helps to make the whole thing more digestible for active Latter-day Saints, but I would hope so,
Yeah,
because
that's a good point.
there's clearly I was doing all of this stuff that I talked about in there and a lot more, and I wasn't doing it other than by the power of God. So let's go figure.
Well, it does seem, that, and I'm always reconstructing God and trying to figure out things in my mind and how the universe works, but because I don't like the idea of a controlling God. But it does seem like sometimes there's people that have a certain trajectory, a certain mission to accomplish that is kind of critical. And you almost seem like, to end up where you ended up, there were just key things that had to happen and fall into place. And one of them was that you were willing to listen to that spiritual intuition that you felt at any time in your life, even when you're having trouble with general authorities and church leaders and your wife and who knows. But you had this intuitive sense that kind of this North Star that you kept in that trajectory. And and a lot of things happen, like you were the one just in front of President Packer, who at that age and that time, well, even before then, but not an easy thing to do, to have to face him and the two other general authorities that accompanied you in there with him. Yeah. To talk about is it Brigham City Temple?
Or
Logan?
Yeah,
Brigham City.
it was Brigham City.
Yeah, because that's where he's from.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the expectation with all these temple plans was that he was not going to like any of them, which he didn't. But you were inspired. You felt
the general authorities with me did not know that was what was going to happen, but I knew inside myself that he was not going to like anything they told me to bring.
Yeah,
and
but they were kind of terrified of him.
They were.
Even went in there.
I was less terrified of President Packard than they were, and I was like,
"Which is why they put you right in front of him."
Yeah, what am I missing? I was closer to him than I am to you, and And when I finally pulled out that
The one that you weren't supposed to bring.
one that I wasn't supposed to
Maybe
bring.
tell the story, Laurie.
Yeah.
Skipping over.
Yeah, sorry. I decided I'm gonna get really sorry. Thank you, Barbara.
Story.
It is such a great story. It drips with irony, particularly a few years down the road.
So it was a special opportunity to have the president of the Quorum of the 12 let into the design of temples. And so this was a unique thing that President Monson had granted to his arch nemesis, the president of the Quorum of the 12.
Yeah, because they didn't see eye to eye.
They didn't see eye to eye on much, but I think it was a moment of great generosity on President Monson's part, which I appreciated. But I was with Bishop McMullen and Elder Walker, who's the head of the temple department, and Bishop McMullen oversaw our temple construction. And I was invited to go along as the silent architect taking notes. I was told not to say a word. I was told by Bishop McMullen specifically to bring these pictures of these temples.
Yeah.
And as I was assembling it, I got to thinking about President Packer and what I knew of his interests and affinities. And I thought, he's going to hate these. and because he was a classicist. And well, she's my great editor.
Yeah.
Stories.
Yeah. The details.
Yeah,
I read the book, so
he was a classicist and a historicist. And the temples we were showing were some of these 90s and early 2000 kind of really, modernist
Right.
boxes. And
Not like the classic early Mormon temple.
yeah, and the best thing I had that wasn't an early Mormon pioneer temple was the Kansas City temple, which we were working on at the time, which was based physically in its form and so forth on those early pioneer temples. And I thought if there's anything that might pique his interest and demonstrate that I was not a crummy designer, it worth throwing out of his office. And I snuck it in the back. And as the meeting went on, it went exactly as I thought. Within 3 minutes, he looked at all the pictures that I'd been told to bring, and the room fell silent. And he hadn't really picked any of them up, talked about anything, or he just, grumped. And well, you got to know what he was like.
Yeah.
And
If I was looking at those temple pictures, I would have too.
But I had been told not to say a word. My purpose in being there was to hand a picture and to take notes and to listen.
Yeah. You reiterate that a couple times in the book. Yeah.
But it had been made so clear to me, I was not to open my mouth in President Packer's presence.
And where were you in transition at the time?
Prior to
I
was out to myself,
but not
and family, but
yeah, that's what I thought.
but not beginning transition at that
Yeah.
point, but very much aware of who I was.
And what was his reaction to when you
So
finally?
I kind of, to Bishop McMullen, I kind of said, "Can I show one more?"
Yeah.
Since I wasn't supposed to be talking, and he kind of gave me the slightest nod of a yes, because they were dead in the water, meeting over. And so I pulled out this rendering of the Kansas City temple, and I brought it up just as I'd done the others, and he, came out of his grump and picked it up and brought it to himself and looked at it carefully for a while. He hadn't touched any of the others, hadn't even looked at the others. They just landed on the table in front of me, staring at it for a while. And then he set it down. He said, this will do nicely, but we need 2 more bays of windows. And he reached into his jacket, he pulled out a pen. He says, "Can I write on this?" Oh, yes, President, you can. and he sketched on a couple more bays of windows, as if I couldn't imagine what he meant. And he said, "This will work very nicely." And so we expanded Kansas City slightly and ornamented it a little bit better, a little bit stronger, and took some cues from Salt Lake Temple. And that became Brigham City Temple. Well, that meeting went so well at that moment. I'm walking back to the church office building through the parking structure with Bishop McMullen and Elder Walker. And I thought, what do I say? They were very quiet. And I said, oh, sorry, I kind of took over the meeting. And it was like, no, we're sure glad you did. And before we left President Packer's office, he specifically said he made it in the form of a request, that I might come back periodically and meet with him and share with him how the progress was going. And he made it kind of clear that the other two weren't needed. It was just going to be me one-on-one with the president of the Quorum of 12. And then there's that part.
And you did that.
And I
right?
did that
Yeah.
for the next 4 years while the progress of the design went, and then through the construction pictures. And he would always ask me, when's this going to be completed? Because I'd really like to be alive to see it. And I'm thinking to myself, kind of tongue in cheek, well, gee, President, do you know what day you're gonna leave? See if we can schedule it. I'm a project manager, but you gotta give me a target to work with. But luckily he
You made it.
he made it, and again, graciously, President Ponson turned over the dedication of that temple to him, and stayed away and let President Packer have all of that. And then he lived 3 more years, so he wasn't going anywhere.
And he lived long enough to know of your transition or not?
Oh, yeah.
That's what I
because
saw. That's the beautiful thing.
If I remember, now, keep in mind, I'd worked with him regularly,
Yeah.
personally,
One-on-one.
one-on-one for like 4 years, 08 through 12, when the dedication took place in September of 2012. The following month, the brethren found out I was transgender, or considered myself transgender. I hadn't done anything about it yet. And I started meeting with all the interviews that I described. And then
About that.
about that
About
specific
you
issue, being transgender.
Mm.
And because he was the president of the Quorum of 12 and I was the state president at the time, he had particular oversight of the callings and releases of stake presidents. So sometime within a month of dedicating the Brigham City Temple, and having worked with me all that time, he went to a temple meeting with the First Presidency and the Quorum of the 12 and presented the fact that the stake president in Tooele considers themselves transgender. And I gotta believe he knew
That it was you.
that it was me that had been meeting with him all that time, that had created the temple that he loves so much. And I was released from that.
It almost been 9 years, and
Yeah,
it kind of at that point, you kind of wanted to be released a little bit.
I was
Because
struggling
you were-
so
yeah,
bad
you were in a
because,
hard place.
yeah, I really was struggling.
Yeah. But I love that President Packer
Of all
got to
people,
travel with you through that,
Yeah.
and then of all people who needed something like that in their lives to see what God can do through you.
yeah,
And
Well-
wasn't he kind of, after you transitioned, he was kind of silent on your case, he didn't take a stand,
no.
he wasn't
He's
again.
probably befuddled,
Yeah, I think
I just don't know. And you don't, when
Yeah.
you're in that situation, you
Yeah.
don't have the opportunity to get personal.
Yeah.
He could get personal with me all he wanted and tell me about how he was dying, but, the last year of our working together, I was already out to family and friends and so forth. And I thought, gee, I wonder if the president of the Quorum of the 12 can sense this about me, not to say it in any way that is negative or inappropriate. I just, I'd be standing there with him thinking of the fact that, President, do you realize I'm transgender while I'm showing you these pictures of the construction of your temple? But that obviously wasn't the case, but yeah, I gotta believe that he totally understood who I was within a month of the dedication. And then I go on to tell the story of what it was like. My first meeting a month later with the First Presidency and presenting temples to them. I'd done that 50 or 60 times already, monthly, over the previous several years. And then how, knowing that those men knew me as President Packer did, and wondered how they would respond to me as I'm making presentation to them after they just released me as stake president and said it was okay for me to stick around as an employee as long as I behaved myself. And I described how President Uchtdorf came in early to the meeting and embraced me and told me that they were grateful that I was with them. You know, which happened to be true until I had to go a little more off script. Yeah. But I was convinced, as I described in the chapter where I talk about Esther and the role that Esther had.
Yeah, I love that.
I was convinced
And
that
that came to you as a burst of inspiration.
it really did.
Yeah.
I mean, wake up in the morning on vacation and the first thing I hear in my head is read Esther.
Yeah.
You
And
know?
you were not thinking about any of that.
No, I hadn't read Esther since my mission, and I couldn't remember where Esther was in the Old Testament or what the story was about until I started reading it. And then I read it and it was like, okay, I see. It was like that North Star that you described. That North Star is being held out right in front of me. That, hey, this is you in modernity. You get to be this Esther for your people.
Yeah.
And I really had high hopes that since I was inside and walking the halls, that I might be able to, you know, help the brethren reach a point through asking and answering questions with them that they could appreciate our situation as church members who experienced gender dysphoria, and that never happened.
You know,
other than, you know, I kind of left my witness.
And I think that's really valuable. And now it's in a book.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think it's for naught. You know, these cultural things, it's so willing to change sometimes. So, you know,
I'm impatient that way, though.
Well, we all are.
I really love
This group is particularly impatient. But
I was in the mode to burn down Atlanta to get to where I needed to get to.
Yeah.
But yeah,
But-
no, I appreciate that.
No, really, I think, you know, it's a significant contribution and one that I think was God-led.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you testify that
I do.
again and again in there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really impressive. Because you were definitely swimming upstream and still on their ways. But
Whatever we believe about who or the big who's of who God is, that I don't think there was any particular concern at all about the script that I was on. I think it was God-led.
yeah.
I think it was, you know, Nancy and I talked about the fact that we're together because
Yeah.
of the hand of the Lord.
Yeah.
And I seriously believe that the telling of this story is, as you say, exactly what should happen. And my hope is that it's read far and wide, not for my benefit, but for the benefit of all who need to understand and appreciate that this journey exists and is real.
Yeah. Thank you. So I'm gonna open it up for questions and then, yeah. Sure.
My curiosity, and it's totally my curiosity, the fact that you were a man of privilege who had influence,
Mhm.
and knowing that that step would smash everything. That's the part that is curious to me, how to give up privilege to be a woman and have no privilege.
Well, I'm certain that all of those male members of the church who feel like they've got that privilege, that none of them would give that up unless that's not who they were in the first place.
Exactly.
And that wasn't who I was. I had all that, yeah. So I didn't have to. I mean, I could have continued.
But you didn't have it. This other person did.
Yeah, this other
Yeah.
presentation had that.
The
Sure.
the white man suit.
Yeah,
Yes.
the cisgender heterosexual white man suit. You know, and it was fun. I mean, I had it rolling. It was great.
Well, you're very successful in the profession.
I had
and ecclesiastically too.
And as far as I'm
Bishop,
concerned,
state president.
if I'd have kept my mouth shut, I would have would have continued to have the best professional job that a Latter-day Saint architect could have. You know, top of my field. And I was pretty popular in this valley because I was the one who signed all the contracts with all the architectural firms and all the construction firms. So they all liked me. You know, or at least I knew who my friends were because they were the ones who wanted to wine and dine me, and I would never do that. But you know, that I got all that attention until all of a sudden I didn't. So sometimes I talked a lot more about this years ago, that everything I was and everything that defined me all went onto the altar as an offering so that I could obtain this one opportunity to live as my authentic self. And so I really looked like, I used that analogy for myself to say that, yeah, everything about me is on the altar. And I pretty well lost all of it. But I gained the one thing I needed. And in the process, I got a whole lot of other fun stuff back. You know, it's a little bit of a Job story, you know.
I love that.
You know, you lose everything, but then gain a lot back.
Lose a life you had, but then gain
Yeah.
a different.
I mean, nobody would have read a book written by me if I'd have stayed who I was. Nothing interesting about that.
Yeah, I think Laurie Lee, your life, you know, what you were willing to put on the altar and what you did lose. You know, you lost this amazing career, you were at the top, the pinnacle, like you said, very powerful at work, right?
Mhm.
Very powerful ecclesiastically, you were a stake president. Family, 5 children, your church membership, so you lost your church membership, you were excommunicated. Your wife then divorced you, so you lost your marriage. Some of your children have chosen to reject you, unfortunately. Of course, you gained so much, like you mentioned, but to me, that was like, people don't take this lightly. This is when people are identified as transgender, this isn't like
Not a
fun,
whim.
it's not a fad, it's not a whim, it's real. And or even like on a funny note, she talks about, Laurie Lee talks about electrolysis. What if pain and the expense she went through to have her beard removed.
She sold her truck.
She sold.
Yeah,
You know, just
Truck.
that. I was like, people don't do this. So when someone tells us they're transgender, we need to believe them. This is not fun or trendy any more than it's fun or trendy to be gay or lesbian or whatever. You know, this is real, and we need to accept and believe people.
And I
when
did
they say
trans.
this is who I am.
I did trans before trans was cool. Yeah. Everybody knows trans now, but back when I did this
Yeah.
10 years ago, it was, it wasn't
Very
that
much
very
so.
well understood or known.
Yeah.
But yeah, that all happened. But I'd do it again. Would I, do I second guess what I did? No.
In spite of everything you gave up and lost, you're happier now for what you gained.
If I had to live in a little 1-room apartment, and tinker with my architecture just to be me,
It's worth it.
luckily life got to be a whole lot nicer than that. Yeah.
Kyla? You had your hand up, right?
I did.
Okay.
I was going to be asking a question.
Hi, Kyla.
Hi, I'm a new trans woman as of 6 years ago. Do you wish that when you were in the church that you had spent more presence vouching for the acceptance of trans or even women in the church? Or are you glad that you are vouching even more now?
So, unfortunately, they didn't give me much time in the church. I've mentioned a few times, I think I had about 9 months to actually be a Latter-day Saint sister before I wasn't.
Well, talk about that. So she used to come to this group years ago, and you met a couple there who led you to the Liberty
Ward, because
Ward.
at that point I was excommunicated, so I could attend anywhere I wanted to.
Yeah.
I was living in South Salt Lake, so it was only a few blocks to get to the Liberty Ward. And so I had that great experience for about 10 months.
And you were fully accepted. You were even helping teach.
I was helping the Relief Society presidency, and
It's a great bishop.
just incredible. And he was an architect too, so we're good people. But yeah, my time was short. Kyler in the church. I did what I could for women in my ward and stake and in my employment. I think I may mention some of those things, but while I was still presenting as male. But I think I've been reasonably tireless in talking about these things as much as anyone will listen since. And the writing of the book is a gift to continue to be able to help the transgender community, not just within Mormonism, but everywhere. And the interesting thing is how much this story resonates with people with whatever challenges in their lives they might have. I've been really humbled to have folks with disabilities or other life challenges or difficulties in families or with kids or whatever it may be come back and say, I so related to what you were thinking and doing here. And that was nothing to do with them being trans. They weren't trans, but they understood the conflict. And, we live in a time where politically it's tough to be anything outside of a certain small definition. And I know what it's like. I desperately know what it's like to live under a power system that's oppressively in control of your life. But guess what? As Americans, we may all be in a situation where we're living under a power system that has enormous control over our lives. And dictates of conscience tells you how I survived that, which maybe helps us all to know how to survive no matter what situation we're in, struggling with
You're talking political, are you?
power structures, whether they be religious or political or whatever it may be.
I don't know how to get to Canada, so
But I don't know, did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
just if you read the book, I mean, at the time, like as this bishop and stake president, you were very conscious of women and their voices. And in fact, and you would rearrange how leaders would sit so that
Mhm.
women had an equal seat at the table. So he did some unusual, she did some, at
It's
the
hard
time
to
it was he.
It's hard to talk about the stake president as she.
I know.
Refer to me as Madam Stake President.
Madam Stake President.
Yeah.
The stake president at the time did some things that women really appreciated, and they told you that.
Mhm.
In fact, at one point, you were kind of invited into a circle of women as almost one of them.
Yeah.
You talk about
Still
it.
had this silly white shirt and tie on.
Yeah, yeah.
It was.
You're still an ecclesiastical leader.
I was the stake president,
Yeah,
so
stake
yeah,
president.
and yet, and I mentioned that the one gal that I had talked with about this, she remembered that night, and we're talking about like 6-7 years later, maybe more. She remembered that night because it was like my facade went away, and I was one of the sisters at that table.
Mm.
And I remember feeling it. It was like, good gosh, they're talking about stuff they'd never talk about with me here.
Yeah.
And, I leaned into that and just, tried to bask in it and not say anything that would have been upsetting.
One thing you point out that's really telling too was that when you were state president, you were very welcome as a male, presenting as male, to go to female spaces. So they loved it when you came to Relief Society, loved it, when you visit, drop in Young Ones or whatever.
And
But ironically, it was after you transitioned and went to a Relief Society class,
that I got in
you
trouble.
were excommunicated.
Yeah. For that one.
For that,
Yeah.
going as a female to a female space, you were excommunicated
Yeah.
for.
Yeah.
But when you had that priesthood authority, you were welcome in female spaces, which
That's another irony.
yeah, very telling.
Crazy.
Yeah.
And you were just accompanying someone there, or Relief Society. So it's not like you went boldly in there to
You
say,
just sat that in the back.
I was there as subtly as I felt I could be.
Yeah.
And for only like 20 minutes of a 45-minute class too.
Oh. Let's see, Andy, I remember.
we also have a question.
Okay, Andy, and then, okay. Want to do that one? From this? You do yours, and then we'll go to there.
Specifically, as you talk about placing all on the altar, it is not lost on me, and I mean, as I see the macro of this, it's not lost on me that you are an architect. You had to build the structure of the
Yeah.
altar upon which you had to place this, and the structure and the architecture of how many people who would come after you, you know, and
The
have the
altar.
support that they needed. My question is quickly, during your transition time, because you know, you knew you were a woman long before it was apparent to other people or these sorts of things. But did you find that your artistic work also showed transition as well? I mean, the Brigham City Temple and the Kansas City Temple are astounding. The murals of the Brigham City with Gary Smith's murals are just bold and challenging and really scream expansionism in a way that I think many were not ready for. But that confluence of artists in that project, I believe, metaphysically built a structure and a temple that allowed bodies to change, allowed, and the way the temples are bodies, allowed so many to come forward, just as you were able to.
So if we wanted to drill deeply into the time frame that I was doing certain things, I talk in the book about the process of investigation and discovery into my gender identity simultaneously with the investigation and ultimately the design work that became the Provo City Center Temple.
Interesting.
Yeah, and those happened concurrently.
Yeah.
And that whole idea of taking that burnt out structure and
Perfect.
basically resurrecting it into something more beautiful, I was doing with my life as well. And did I realize that when it was happening? No, it was only when I sat down and started to write these things that it was like, wow,
Yep.
you know, I'm seeing that I was physically doing this, leading the team that created that truly lovely bit of architecture, that lovely temple, and then was doing the very same thing, bringing my own life to its highest purpose. And then to carry on, Andy, with your thought that once I began taking hormone therapy in 2014, while I was still a church employee for a couple more years, those last 2 years were spent on the Missionary Training Center in Provo, the expansion. And although not a temple, it's some of the most beautiful and spiritual work that I was able to work on. And nobody ever gets to go there unless you're a missionary. But
I just moved from behind the back gate, so I
Yes.
saw you work daily.
Yes.
Thank you.
She and Charlotte England.
Yeah, no, there was something really interesting in those last 2 years that I was a church employee, because I really had started my transition unbeknownst to anyone else. And I was starting practicing feeling like me, the fullness of me.
Yeah.
And that what I told them was true, that if they had accommodated me and let me fully transition and remain employed, they would have gotten the very best version of me going forward.
Well, and I don't want to take any more time, but I love the idea, the visualization of a garden, and you're designing this holy garden, and you are the new Eve. You are the new Eve,
Thank you.
very much so. And what is the first thing that happens to Eve? She's ejected from the garden.
That's interesting.
But that's why we continue to build these gardens of Eden everywhere we go. Thank you.
Lovely. Hey, Jenna, you had some moment?
Yeah, someone from the Zoom.
Who is it?
So Martina McBride,
Oh, my friend Martina.
and she says, my friend's with me, and she is curious if you still have LDS gospel beliefs or if that has changed as you have transitioned.
It's evolved. It's a great question. One of the things that I describe with regard to the dictates of one's conscience is, and I used that phrase in the at the tail end of the excommunication. I was asked, what do I want to have come out of that meeting? And I said, I simply want to be able to worship God according to the dictates of my conscience, and my conscience confirms to me that I'm female. And then they excommunicated me, and it took me a few weeks. When I thought about it, it was like, that's exactly what I asked for. I asked for the opportunity to go forward worshiping God, unfettered by all the little boxes and check marks of Mormonism. And so to kind of answer more directly the question, I realized I had from then on the responsibility to decide exactly how do I want to believe and what do I want to believe in. It's all in my lap. And I think a lot of folks get to that point. I think, quite frankly, that had I not been excommunicated, I wouldn't have evolved in faith and hope as fast as I did, because I was too willing to kind of stay in the groove, even though I was off script on a couple of topics. But it has been a wonderful personal experience to allow my view of eternity, my view of the life after this life, all of those things to open beyond what I felt taught to do, or taught to feel, or taught to think. And I've had a few very personal and powerful experiences with divine love. One was prior to the excommunication, and one was after. And I just have the joy of knowing that rather than certainty and a faith in something that I know, I have this great joy in the hope that that glimpse of divine love that I experienced on a couple of occasions is going to be realized by all of us at some point. And maybe that's what everybody in the world has always been seeking and have been working really hard at putting together definitions and religions and, the best thoughts that inspired people could come up with. And I'm out there, hopefully with many of you beyond that, with a great hope for what's yet to be experienced.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
But I drag along a lot of my Mormon vocabulary and even, I mean, that's been my tribe for my adult life. And, so I kind of put things in terms of Mormonism, but I feel like I'm seeing beyond it, which isn't to say that one church is good or bad, or it's just that I think that there's an opportunity for us to really see beyond worrying about policies and restrictions and all this, malarkey. The feelings I had after the excommunication with regard to basically that was an administrative action of an institution, and a flawed one at that, and God wasn't in it, that was all very helpful. But I often will mention that I know a lot of folks who have left Mormonism, particularly, who along with it lose all of their hope and faith and beliefs, and because it was somehow all tied into the fact that the church provided that for them. And I think that's a terrible shame. I feel sad for that, because strip away the church and there's still a lot of beauty and inspiration and goodness that can be enjoyed. And be okay with the idea that it's not certainty, it's about discovery and beauty and hope. I think I have more faith. I walk by hope more now than I did by faith, or what I thought was knowledge.
Nice. Listen,
Stephen's been waiting.
yes.
Hi, Laurie.
Hi.
Help us know how many women are employed in the church office building. And are those positions of rank, decision-making positions? Is church employment, I realize churches don't have to follow all the rigors of federal employment law.
Right.
I'm trying to find out.
I'm a living example of that.
Does the church office tower, the big building downtown, employ many women who are in decision-making positions?
No.
Or can the listing simply say this position, that the call for applicants simply state this must be filled by a man?
I know obviously they don't write them that way any longer. But I came into church employment in August of 1996. And at that time, the vast majority of women working in the church office building, lots of them, were administrative assistants and what we used to call secretaries and clerks.
And they had to wear nylons.
And we.
Until just a few years ago, they had to wear nylons.
And dresses.
And dresses.
For the church for 12 years, about the same time that
Yeah,
Lee was there.
were nylons required when you started working there?
Oh, yes, and
Yeah.
by the time I left 12 years later, they were still required
Yeah.
and dress.
Well, certainly in dress, yes, dress or skirt.
Now it's
Um,
pants, no nylons. So
yeah,
it's much
yeah.
better. But yeah, I would agree, Laurie. There were few women there that were like on a career track, that you were, there with a career.
So,
And-
yeah,
and then
exactly.
Most of the women were administrative assistants. I think that's changed a little bit, but in terms of like women as in decision making
So-
positions, it's a little bit better, but
Yeah.
not very many are
The
in
director level position.
director level. Yeah.
At
like
at the
3.
church office building, there were, just, during the time that I was there, I saw about 3 women reach that level. Director has enough decision-making capacity to oversee, a whole range of employees and so forth. I was made a director at age 37, which was really young to be a director. Because that was usually something that men obtain to after 20 years of employment. But there were a handful. One was a member of the Relief Society presidency here a few years back.
One was Jenny Lund. The first one was
Right.
Jenny Lund, who Rick Turley in the
Right.
church history department made a director.
And I can't remember
Oh, Rick.
Another woman,
His
yes,
sister's
another woman
name that
in
was in-
humanitarian
Yes.
services.
Yes, she was a director in welfare services and became a member of the Relief Society presidency, general presidency.
Were there any women on the architectural team?
I was gonna get to that, so yes, so good. To keep me moving, because I was heading off into another thought, but I think I described in the book my interior designers.
Oh, not
Anybody
much
remember?
detail that I remember.
Okay, I'm gonna tell the story then. While I was director of architectural design for temples and special projects, I had about 38 employees. The architects were all male. 2 of the interior designers were men, and about 7 of the interior designers were women. And some had come from another department, and we put together this group of interior designers, and I assigned one of the architects that reported to me to oversee their work. And as I got to know them, since I was new in my position at that time, I realized that as we had a ton of workload, both in the new construction, new design of temples, as well as renovation of all the other ones that existed, and there was a whole bunch of them coming down the pike that needed renovation, and the interior designers were involved in every single one of them, that the sisters were being given assignments. I was giving assignments to the sisters that were identical to the ones that were going to the men. And yet there was tens of thousands of dollars of difference in salary.
We didn't put this in the book.
We didn't.
Oh,
Um,
you didn't work.
tens of thousands, multiple tens of thousands of dollars difference between most of the women who were doing temple interior design and the 2 senior men who were doing interior design. And I'm their new director, and I look at this and I go, this is not fair. This cannot exist. But I got to work in my kind of push this mark as far as I can kind of effort. There were a couple of things that some of those sisters needed to do in terms of completing classifications, certifications and so forth. And in one case, a couple of college classes, but I rushed them along to get all of their certificates in place so that I could take a proposal forward that says that I've got 7 interior designers, they're all doing the same level of work. I knew for a fact they weren't going to reduce the salary of the 2 men. And so my point was, based upon how much experience they had, and the 2 men happened to have had the most years in service, they were close to retirement, but based on years of experience and so forth, I got them approved, all have the same grade level. And several of those sisters got significant pay raises, commensurate with their talents and their abilities and what they were being asked to do. Then I got put out of Temples and then put out of church employment altogether. But one of those sisters became the manager of the interior design department, which made me very happy. Because the 2 men retired, and that was an important step, to have one of the sisters become the manager of the section. A few years after I left church employment, I met a friend that both Barbara and I are friends with, Tanya, and found out that she was a sister who'd been hired by the church after I left into an architect position. She had a PhD in architecture, and she was doing the same kind of work that my male architects were doing. And as I got to know her and talk with her some more, she said to me, and I really appreciated this, she recognized her place in history as being the first female temple architect, until the Holy Ghost said, "You're the second." And she testified that to me, that she had this really, really strong spiritual experience that said, "No, you're not the first, you're the second."
This story's going in the second edition.
Yeah, I said, it's not in there. That's a good
That's
story.
why you come to these meetings.
Yeah,
You
special.
gotta get the Easter eggs. But I mean, I really appreciated that, because that same
Yeah.
spirit
Yeah.
bore witness to her that
Yeah.
that she was just building on.
What's remarkable to me about this new story you just shared, which was new for me, I haven't heard
Yeah.
that yet, was you said that you put more women at the table ecclesiastically in your stake,
Yeah.
literally, because you had a woman's heart as you were serving as state president. And it just occurred to me, you did this for women professionally at work,
Yeah.
also because I don't know how many men would even care
Yeah.
and do that,
No.
you know, but what you did was remarkable. So.
Yeah, I could not make that happen.
Yeah, and you saw it because you're a woman. Sorry.
So there's Sarah and then Taylor. Sorry, trying to be gender equal here.
Why would you do that?
I'm wondering, like, who, as you see the church today, and oftentimes that we see are like 1 step forward, 2 steps back. Seems like the people that come forward to help to push things more, more towards really where we should be. There's always a testing, and then we go back, and then we come a little bit further and we go back. Who in your mind, or who are the people today that you look in administration that you feel like are kind of like the champions within, that you're like, okay, that person's at the help, is helping out there, and we know that this needle's gonna move just a little bit.
Yeah, we're a few funerals away from some of that happening. But
You're talking about the LDS church specifically.
Right.
yeah,
Right.
yeah, which I know something about, so I'll talk
You
about
met
it.
with a few of them.
Yeah, I was prepared for this question last night, because I was lying in bed thinking about this, hadn't thought about it in years. That I have a good friend who is a transgender woman about my age, still with her wife. They must be 40 years into their marriage at this point, and live in Maine. And when Deb first came out, she was pretty much chucked out of her branch in stake in Maine. And they stayed away until the bishop and stake president changed. And then they got brave and went back to the new bishop and stake president and to see if test the waters to see if it was okay if Deb and her wife, could attend church again. And one of the points, and I'm talking about this was 13 years ago now. One of the points in question was whether the stake president would be comfortable with Deb and her wife attending Relief Society together. And it just so happened that the new stake president was an individual who could pick up the phone and call Elder Holland at the time of the 12. And the stake president explained to Elder Holland, again, we're talking about 2012 or so, the situation and how would Elder Holland feel about Deb attending Relief Society with her wife. And the answer was, of course she belongs in Relief Society. She's a sister, right? Well, if you've read my book, you find out that 5 years later, that was taboo because the church was pursuing a legal policy, in the Supreme Court of the United States and had to back it up with performance on the part of the church, which then led to many of us being told, you're not welcome in Relief Society. And if you go, you get disciplined, and I did.
So it was like performative to say, yes, of course you're welcome, but truly, as soon as we can.
I think he was sincere at the time.
Yeah, did you feel like he was?
I think at the time, I think Elder Holland was sincere. Whether in his current position and with his more advancing age and health, that he would feel that way if he were suddenly find himself the president of the church, that he's only 2 steps away from being. I don't know, but I know where his heart was as a younger apostle. Now, I also share in the book the extra effort that Elder Uchtdorf, President Uchtdorf at the time, made in my regard to help me feel loved and welcome. I think, again, when he's not in a position of being assigned to do something, his feelings may be different. I mentioned my dear friend, Elder Richard Heaton, who's an Area 70. If he should ever find his way into the upper echelon, he might. He was as accepting of me as anyone in the church I've ever known. And after having worked with him on the Provo Missionary Training Center, he wrote a lovely, upon my retirement from church headquarters, he wrote a lovely recommendation letter for me using my now given name and my proper pronouns as though I had been Laurie Lee the entire time we worked together on the Missionary Training Center. So that's his acceptance of me, and I met with him many times after, and I tell the story about being invited to the VIP open house at the Missionary Training Center, in which I went presenting as me, and how he introduced me to other 70 and other department leaders as the architect for the expansion.
And to missionaries.
That went by and all of that.
Introducing you to everyone.
There are glimpses in my story of individuals who, if unfettered from restrictions and policies, would act with true, loving, compassionate Christian hearts, and just hope that maybe someday there are more of them in positions where they can be making decisions. And yet, if you've read my book or if you've been aware, the current restrictions in place that went in place last August that I talk about in the afterword in the book are as egregious and upsetting and strict and draconian as at any time in the history of the church regarding its transgender members. So Deb's stake president wouldn't have to ask that question if it were today, because it's written on a piece of paper that's an attachment to the General Handbook of Instructions that says, no, she can't go.
Yeah, there's, you do highlight in your book a number of instances where people Um, even in leadership, bishops and even
Mhm.
sometimes stake presidents, but they step up and really just show a beautiful charity and love.
Mhm.
Treat you as, you know, you deserve to be treated. And that gives me great hope.
Yeah.
That gives me great hope. And so again, regardless of what happens at the top, we can follow dictates of our conscience. We can choose how to act. And that one bishop got released 3 years into his bishopric because he supported
Because
you.
he was supporting me.
Yeah, but I think he would still stand by what he did and
Oh, absolutely.
his decision.
We're still good friends, and
Yeah.
Noah's met him, and he's been in our house. Nancy
Yeah.
knows him well, and
And if we had more of that,
yeah.
I mean, that's the kind of thing that over time changes
Mhm.
the policies and the higher things. If more and more people can see and feel those things and do it, it's so I'm very hopeful.
Yeah.
And then Taylor, did you ask?
I did have a question, yeah, but if
Yeah.
that's okay, I mean,
Yeah.
just if there's still time. I'm really moved by the name of your book and by the life that's clearly lived in an effort to live that. And I just wondered if you have wisdom to share with us about what you've learned about how to live a life according to the dictates of your conscience. Is there some wisdom that you might share from a life of practicing that virtue?
Yeah, and it has been a life of practicing that too. You know, whether all the way back to when I was a teenager and having to make choices that I knew were right for me that were against the grain of what I was being told to do. To me, it's something I've learned to love and appreciate and live with. And put my stake president hat back on for a moment. I always found myself in the stake president's office. Folks would come in, well-meaning Latter-day Saints, who were really hoping that their priesthood leader would answer their questions for them and help them make their decisions based on inspiration that I would have for them. And the only inspiration I ever had for any of them was how to go home and receive their own inspiration. I never answered anyone's question, but they never left the office mad. But they left the office perhaps with one or two more tools on how to seek and obtain their own answers, because that's where it's at. I guess the wisdom, if there's any wisdom to impart from all of this, is that Mormonism has a tendency to put us in a really strange dichotomy in which we're encouraged to seek personal revelation, but we're also taught that revelation for the church comes down through the president of the church. And if you get some guidance for your own life through personal revelation that somehow doesn't jive with what the brethren have already said, don't get ahead of the brethren. Well, I honestly, although I was always kind of in the track and strictly obedient, I never bought into that. And it got particularly easy as I spent a lot of time with the brethren, you know, day in and day out at work and often in my ecclesiastical responsibilities. They were just good men trying hard too, you know, and I really believe strongly, and I talked about this a lot in my podcast with Cynthia and Susan on it last. She said it, that we really don't need to have anybody between us and deity. And let me say that again. We don't need anybody between us and deity. Doesn't matter if we're male, if we're the priesthood leader in our home, doesn't matter if we're single woman, married woman, whoever we are. I believe in personal revelation more than I believe in anything else. And when I was a member of the church, particularly in my later years as a member of the church, I didn't care what anybody said I needed to do in the stake or what I had to do with regard to my life. I had absolute confidence in the idea that if I studied something out and sought inspiration on it, that it was available. And I didn't have to ask permission of anybody else. They never heard from me at church headquarters while I was a stake president. I'm not even sure they remembered I was out there.
Or tell the
Well,
example, share your example of Prop 8 and what you,
Oh,
and
yeah.
how you rejected the
Yeah.
whole direction on that
If you
as
remember-
state president.
If you remember Prop 8 in California and the big hoo-ha in 2008, when they were trying to overturn marriage equality in California, and how boldly, strongly, inappropriately the church forced itself into that. Well, that was primarily to the members of the church in California, but sitting out in the desert in Tooele, they figured we were close enough to California that we must have connections out there. And so the state presidents in the Tooele Valley, there were 7 or 8 of us at the time. We met together with an Area 70 4 times a year. And during that lead up to the election in 2008, the 4 meetings prior to that election, instead of talking about things that we would benefit each other and how we could move the gospel forward in our valley, we had 90-minute lecture on what we needed to do to advance Prop 8. And this was before I accepted the reality that I was transgender. It was back there in the back of my mind. So I wasn't particularly boldly LGBT at that time, or an advocate or an ally, but I became disgusted with this hard press on Prop 8. And I decided, although we were being told, you go back and you teach your bishops this, and you go back and, and pulpits need to be aflame with, going and donating, and getting all of your California friends and neighbors and relatives to work for this Prop 8 thing. And I made a decision sitting in that high council room in Stansbury Park that no one in my stake, not my counselors, not my spouse, were ever going to hear one word about Prop 8 come out of my mouth. And they didn't. But the good thing was nobody followed up with me to see if I'd actually done that. And that was, in 2008, that was quite a while ago. I had a young man in my stake who's remained a good friend, who came out to his family around the time he was out of high school as gay, and married his sweetheart in a wedding that I attended. And not long ago, he read Dictates of Conscience, not long after it came out, and he reached out to me. Still lives out in the West Valley there someplace. He came up, he called me up and said, you know what? I never realized as a kid I was growing up in a state where it was more safe to be me than if I'd lived in any other part of town, because you insulated me from any of that negativity about being gay and wanting someday to marry the man of my dreams. And I just felt that it's like, yeah, somebody was benefited because I was a stubborn mule and wasn't going to let the church become tainted by this horrible political angry mess. Not my pulpits. But it blessed him, because I don't know how old he was, but in 2008, but he was probably middle school age, really tender.
Yeah.
And if we'd have gotten up and said, whatever would have been said, what was said in the other churches in town, how much harm that would have caused.
Part of that wisdom that I noticed in the book, this helps you professionally and ecclesiastically, is you really did study things out. I mean, you did deep research and things, whether it was a project that you were on, and then you often involved others in getting their feedback and thoughts. And I thought that was
I love
really,
collaboration.
really,
Yeah.
really beautiful. That's something that we can apply.
Yeah.
Going forward. And again, you would pray. I mean, you prayed in faith, and then you got answers, and then you follow those answers that you felt, those impressions.
Like when I was told if I went to church on a given Sunday, I'd find my home.
Yeah,
when I first moved to Tooele.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, it just sometimes those answers came.
Yeah.
I need a home.
Yeah.
Well, come to church at 9 AM and you'll get your home. Okay.
Yeah.
Do that.
And then you're calling as the state president, that was, or was it the bishop, when the guy that was kind of not excited about your name, because as the prior state president was when you were called
Yeah,
the bishop. And
Yeah.
he thought, well, I want to choose my own bishop. But then he was prompted when he saw your house,
Yeah.
he said, that's gonna be the bishop, but he didn't know you were
He
there.
didn't know it was my house.
Yeah.
That he was running by.
So again, those things, it's just
These things
kind of
happen.
amazing, yeah.
Yeah.
It's just,
To people that are kind of trying to be in tune
yeah.
and trust that and just act on it. And then when you see that it's real, express gratitude. I've never failed to express gratitude for those kinds of things that happen. Because whatever force it is out there that's helping us along the way, they like to be thanked. And I've always made that a part of who I am.
I love that. That's a good place to start. We're kind of past time. I just want to express gratitude.
One more question.
One more question. Okay, and now I'm gonna express gratitude for you. Everybody else.
To express gratitude for recognizing value of work sisters. But there's a question: if the LDS Church offered to rescind your excommunication without requiring detransition, would you choose to be rebaptized?
There was a time when I would have said yes. Being rebaptized in my proper name, going through the temple and getting the right versions of things done. There was a time when I would have accepted that years ago. Too much would need to be fixed for me to accept that now. Because there's just so much that needs to be corrected. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you, Laurie. Thanks. And thank you, Barbara, for doing the journey of the book with her.
It's been an awesome journey for me and a great privilege.
Yeah.
Thanks, Barbara.
Thanks, Barbara. No, I mean, I'll cry, sorry, but I'm so grateful Laurie came to me.
This has been a great experience, she and I together.
Yeah, I've learned so much. I didn't consider myself transphobic before, but I was trans illiterate,
Yeah, there you
if you
go.
will. Like, yeah, I had so much to learn and I wanted to learn, and I'm just so grateful not only did that Laurie entrusted signature with her book, but also entrusted me as a friend to learn. I've learned so much because of Laurie's book and because of our friendship, and now I consider myself a fierce ally.
Yeah.
For the
And Signature's putting out a lot of queer books
Yeah.
lately, if you've
Yeah.
noticed.
Yeah, that's the other one that has the essay. your
Yep.
essay in it.
Yeah, so while we're on the topic,
Want to
if
show that
anyone
one
would
then?
like a copy of Laurie's book, I have it here for sale.
title of that one?
And this other one is
Book
called
of Queer Mormon Joy.
Queer Mormon
Yeah.
Joy.
Yeah.
That's the book of
Yes.
essays, and Laurie
Okay.
has an essay in that, and so I have those available if anyone just seen me after. And then Laurie, would you be happy to sign?
I will sign anybody's copy that they have here, or any additional new copies, or any of Barbara's copies I'll sign.
She's happy to sign.
Sign.
Happy to sign.
Yeah.
It's good.
And then also, can we announce you're speaking in Park City on Saturday?
Saturday.
So if you have any friends in Park City or Heber, it's at Park City Library at 2 p.m. on Saturday. She's speaking up there as well.
Totally different experience there. I've got a podium and a message to share.
Yeah. And they're making a pride themed craft afterwards. So bring your kids.
Yeah.
Nice, nice. Thank you. So now, what's interesting is this next month, I have Matt Harris coming.
Yes.
With his book, Second Class Saints. There's some very similar themes
Yes.
between what he as a historian, as he tracks the blacks receiving the priesthood, the blacks losing the priesthood, and then being able to receive the priesthood and go to the temple. Very instructive in terms of how leadership in the church works. And you've shared and kind of illuminated that today, that, they don't often agree. President Packer and President Monson didn't agree on things and didn't get along so well. And that the struggle they have in that body is that they all have to agree, which makes policies change slowly and not create great policies and doctrines sometimes. And so
Yeah.
that's a function of how it is now. I don't know if it'll always be that way, but part of, the difficulties we have in our faith is that. So it'll be, I think you'll find it very illuminating. Matt Harris will, his book uses source material that was not available to anybody else. I mean, basically the diaries of President Kimball that the family granted to him because they trusted him. And he's like Laurie, not antagonistic toward the church. I think Matt probably is active. I'm not for sure. No, okay, not
But
active,
but he's not
but he's not
antagonistic.
antagonistic. He appreciates what the church offers and has, and like you can talk about it just thoughtfully and kindly.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
thank you for doing that.
In fact, Amazon right now, if you were to go look for my book on Amazon, has a little category that you scroll down that says, if you like this, you'll like this one.
Oh,
Those two are together.
And it's paired my book and Matt's
Yeah.
together, and
interesting.
I thought it's really kind of a
Because you've drawn parallels
Yeah.
between the priesthood band, bands based on race, and
Yep.
now there's bands based on
Gender
gender and LGBTQ.
Yeah.
And you said you hope that these bands will be lifted. So-
Yeah, exactly. We just, I say we because I don't go anywhere without Barbara's help.
That's true.
I just presented a paper, feels funny saying I, so that's why we. I just presented a paper to the Mormon History Association Saturday on this very topic of gender identity policies in the 21st century Latter-day Saint Church. At kind of from a historical point of view. Captured a lot of the things that I talked about in here and a couple of others. And that was well received.
Very well received. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's excellent.
Good.
So trying to leave a legacy behind that explains what was going on there
Yeah.
during the last
You
20
wrote the
years.
first draft of transgender Mormon history.
Yeah,
You lived it and
chapter one.
you lived it and you wrote it.
Yeah.
in this book.
Chapter 1 of Transgender Mormon History.
Yeah.
And hopefully there'll be many other chapters, and hopefully there'll be
And other people that
happier
will share
ones.
too.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you for being a trailblazer and for following the dictates of your conscience.
Yeah.
Punctuation.
Anybody want to give a closing prayer? Did not think to call anybody beforehand.
Our great God in heaven, Heavenly Father, Heavenly Mother, one who transcends all these labels that we throw out. We're so grateful to be here tonight, to be in the presence of one who's tried so hard to hear your voice. And we honor her for that. And we pray that we can learn to hear that voice too. And in hearing it, that we will love each other more deeply and create a Zion community that's more reflective of what we all claim to believe, that we really are family. And we're so grateful to have been here tonight, and for just the good people that are here, and the good feeling that creates, and the joy of being together. And we say this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Yeah. Thank you, Taylor.
Beautiful,
Beautiful, Claire.
I wanted to add too, Laura, we don't talk about this enough, but